Hi, everyone. My name is Anne Simard. I'm the director, I'm a staff scientist at UHN, and I'm the director of our network that's called Transform HF. I'm here with three co-creators, collaborators, and we're going to talk about patient partners in research. And we thought, just so that we know who you are, if you wouldn't mind just popping just your first name in the chat and let us know where you're calling from, as this is more of a University Health Network Toronto thing. I'm expecting you're all local because I suspect you're all patients of TGH or Toronto Western. But let us know where you're joining us from. That'd be great. And think you probably saw, but we're recording this as we go, and it'll be available on the Heart Hub after today. So our objective today is to really grow our community of patient partners. And by patient partners, we mean people with a lived experience of heart disease and heart failure. That can be patients, that can be caregivers, or it can be family members, and really thinking about how all these folks can be partners on research initiatives. What we're going to focus on too is what is the role of patient partners? What is good, what is challenging, beneficial, and kind of like how do we work through those challenges, and then really share some strategies so that people who are interested in being patient partners can get involved in some of the great work that's happening. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by three patient partners who've been part of different projects. Heather Cartwright, up on the top left, who's wearing her ball cap, but not today. Todd Murray and Rene Adams. And so they will also be speaking throughout and answering questions, because I think it's important to hear from people who are on the patient partner side, not just people who are researchers doing the work. As we have today's conversation, just want to kind of remind folks, we're going to have a Q&A session and really dig into some of the comments. But, this is really not sort of a time. Please don't share kind of like personal medical information in this context. And please leave lots of room for all voices to be heard. And, if there's disagreement or conflict, we're really trying to learn from each other and look for common ground. So just always good to kind of keep these kind of ground rules in our minds, front and center. We just kind of wanted to get a sense from you as we get going before I turn it over to Rene. And you could maybe just pop these in the chat. So have any of you participated in a research study? So been a participant, for example, did a certain intervention or took a certain medication or didn't take a medication. First, that's kind of my question for you. And I'm looking to see if folks are responding in the chat. Okay, someone participated. Only one of you has participated in a study. And what about actually being part of a research team? Okay, there's a few of you. Okay, good. And then what about, I recognize some of the folks here. What about not participating in a research study, but actually being part of a research team that's designing and implementing a research study? I see Linda said she's already been part of several research teams. A couple folks are brand new. Okay, so a few of you, non-clinical. Okay, cool. So we got a mix of folks who've played various roles. So keep that in mind as we go through today. And we'll really kick things off with somebody who's very much been an integral part of a research team, Rene Adams, and I'll turn it over to her.
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I would like to share my personal perspectives on research participation. Can we get the next slide? So yes, so involvement in research has been a giant learning curve for me. I think I would have benefited from an orientation session in terms of what to expect since I was new to the research world, and I've just been learning as I go, basically. So, getting involved in research helps the researchers to make new discoveries that may open up pathways to new life saving and cost saving technology to the healthcare system. And findings can also assist in advocacy and policy development. I encourage you to take time to understand the types of roles you could play and expectations you may have, and consider the types of compensation you may be able to obtain in terms of how it may affect your income sources or your taxes, and consider what methods might work best for you. So I'll turn it over to Anne.
Thanks, Renee. So you'll hear more about the good, the bad, and the ugly from Renee's perspective later on. But as we kind of dig in, what we just want to kind of remind everybody, what we're looking about and talking about are patient partners who are part of research teams. And the key here is this notion of really trying to explore research questions in a systematic and very structured way so that those findings can be transferable or generalizable. And so we know, we each have our own experience, but we're really looking in research to try to answer larger questions in a very structured and organized way from which we can draw conclusions. And as you know, in Canada, there's lots of different ways that research is funded. And more of these groups that fund research and which research teams are replying to are trying to ensure that the research has patient partners in the work so that you're not just always giving representation and voice to researchers, but that all of the process is informed by patient partners. That can include research that's funded by the federal government. And particularly for most folks here, we're talking about health research. So funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or whether it's funded by other organizations, such as many of you may know Heart and Stroke, which is a charity that also funds research. And how that gets articulated is when they're talking about the guidelines and they're going through the process of a submission for a research grant. Each step of the way is an opportunity to not only have traditional folks on the research team, but to also have patient partners, whether that's going through the actual team formation, submitting the proposal, sometimes also on the peer review processes, and then once research is funded and gets going, the role also of patient partners. The last little bit is to remember there's lots of different kinds of research that's funded in Canada. And the place where typically patient partners often feel most connected to is clinical research. So, basic biomedical research where, you might be looking for biomarkers, or you might be trying to understand like the pathway of a disease, or population health research where you're really looking at the broad determinants of health. There is room everywhere for patient partners, but a lot of you might be more, especially if you've been part of a research study, more kind of clinical research looking at patient care, but also some of you might have been part of thinking about how do we design health services. So if you're part of thinking about how things are designed, then that would be health services research. And when I mentioned earlier who can be part of a research team, the people that we often think about are principal investigators. So that's kind of the leader. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about the PI, the principal investigator. Then they always have collaborators. Very little research is done these days by a solo effort. So you have your co-investigators. There's usually on teams the people that are kind of running things or doing the recruitment and the data collection. Those are research assistants and trainees. And then we also have people who end up using the evidence that's generated by research. We call those research knowledge users or policymakers. And because we spend a lot of time crunching numbers, there's always a lot of statisticians. But the important question to ask ourselves is, where do patient partners fit? That is our greatest untapped resource, our patients. And I'll turn it over to Heather.
Hi, everyone. I'm a person with lived experience. My name is Heather Cartwright, and I'm here to encourage you strongly to apply to be a patient partner with us. I see all the diversity of geography in the chat, and I think that would be great if we could get people outside of Ontario and in rural areas to join us. So as participants, we are volunteers who consent to participate in a research study. And so some of those examples are like a clinical trial, taking something or being given a treatment, or a qualitative study, which is taking part in an interview and sharing your experiences of a health issue or intervention. So as people with lived experience, we really mean people who are not only patients, but caregivers and family members. So we want to make sure they understand it's broad, and you can have a meaningful and active collaboration in governance, priority setting, and conducting research and knowledge translation. So depending on what kind of the context, the patient-oriented research may also engage people who bring a collective voice to specific affected communities. And again, it's a very broad term. When we say patient, we really mean people with lived experience. So include yourself if you don't actually have that health issue, but you're caring for someone or a family member of someone. So the difference between participating and partner, well, I don't want to be too cheeky, but if you think about ham and eggs, the chicken is involved when the chicken's involved, but the pig is committed. So basically the ham is the participant and the eggs are partners. So partners means you're not taking a drug, or you're not, not being injected with something, but you're there basically helping with the study protocol. You're helping draft the interview questions and give feedback. You're taking part in workshops to identify new areas of research. You're helping to analyze data and discuss the potential interpretations. You might attend a conference to hear about the latest research, and you could be co-authoring on a manuscript about the study findings. So it's really being there at the table, discussing with the researchers and being part of it. That's me. That's my picture. That was a couple months ago when it was a lot warmer. And so I really feel the part that's most beneficial to us is empowerment. It gives us a sense of control, especially for those of us who've been living with heart failure, even for a short term or a long time. Being at the table gives us autonomy. It lets us speak our narrative and craft it in a way that helps increase our well-being. It allows you to be optimistic about the future because you're being part of a solution, and gives you a really strong sense of purpose. It also gives you confidence in sharing your valuable insights that you've gained. I mean, these are hard-won knowledge. Let's share it. And it really builds community, and it reduces the isolation and feeling of helplessness that we may feel. Instead of being victims, we're taking a stance to be strong and share what we've learned. You get a lot of personal growth and learn new skills and interact with diverse thinkers. The people I've met at some of these Transform seminars are unbelievable. Young people, really smart people. I've heard new things that I would never have heard if I had just sort of stayed at home in my own world. And it really creates empathy with others about our shared experience. And it's great to be part of a team. So the other benefits are just improving your identification on research topics. and being part of relevant outcomes. Again, this empowerment of ourselves and caregivers and communities to be active in our own care. And I think that really goes a long way to helping us improve our own health. It gives voice to a lot of people who are marginalized or hard to reach populations and communities, and that's really important. I keep saying I'd like to replace myself. I'd like to be out of a job because I'm, a white woman living in downtown Toronto. It would be great if we had lots of people who weren't in my profile. It increases the legitimacy and rationality of research decision making. I mean, this is a really big sea change that people with lived experience are at the table. And so we have to continue to validate that by participating. It strengthens the interpretation of findings, the dissemination of implementation of research findings, and really increases the competitiveness in securing research funding. It's important that we are at the table, and I really, really strongly encourage, if this is something that you would like to do, to attend these upcoming seminars to learn how you can participate, because you'll get a lot out of it. Thank you. And I'm going to throw it over to Todd now.
Hello, I'm Todd Murray. I'm a patient partner who's been with UHN for a few years now, working with a variety of different projects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in regards to being a patient partner, as well as some of the positive outcomes that I've had on one particular project that I've been working on recently. So the first challenge that is this lack of processes to communicate equitably among the stakeholders. So that communication part is a place where we always have to be working to make some improvements. Another challenge is issues with recruiting these patients and caregivers who've had a demographic makeup consistent with the actual patients that are actually being served. A lot of projects that I'm on are actually focusing on trying to achieve that goal. Inadequate logistics, financial or educational resources is also a challenge for patients with lived experience. Difficulty retaining patients over time. And I think some of this difficulty of retaining patients over time could, from a heart failure perspective, could result from the patient's health themselves as it goes up and down through their heart failure journey. But another reason why is sometimes they might become disengaged as well and not feel like they're actually making a difference. And so I think focusing on making sure that all of our patient partners are engaged will be a step in that right direction. The risk of tokenism, from that idea of, so the idea that you're just maybe a patient partner and your name on a paper, that could be a challenge and also result in some of that retention problems as well. Not being in suitable roles. It's a challenge sometimes to find an actual role for yourself. And I think I've been very fortunate with Ann Simard has been very good at kind of directing me in that direction. And I think we're continuing to grow there, but everybody has a role. And some things are suitable for some patients, and other patients they're not suitable for. So we need to find those roles for our patient partners. Having feedback is also a difficult challenge. Sometimes you're not getting that feedback from your team, and I think sometimes that can be discouraging as well. And then finally, engaging too late in efforts. This has been a common thing that I think we're really working on, just bringing that patient in late in the project. It doesn't really encourage them to stay or maybe join other projects. And so we're going to move into my next slide, which kind of relates to engaging at the right time. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the projects I've been working on. I've been with a research team that is looking at the heart-brain connection. So we're actually looking at the effects of blood pressure and ischemia in regards to heart failure and connections to vascular dementia. So this project I've actually been able to be involved in right from pretty much the start. I wouldn't say necessarily in priority setting, but I definitely would say that in study design. And so for this project on this team, one of the first things that we were looking at was a tool that we would use to be able to measure and make connections between dementia and heart failure. So we began looking at a company called Creos, and Creos, I believe, was out of University of London in Western, and their team has developed a piece of software, a cognitive assessment tool that can be used. It involves you going through a number of modules. I think there are 7 modules. And before we actually made the decision to actually use this, we used this in our study design. We actually tested this out. And I was very fortunate as a heart failure patient to actually be able to test this out for the team and then provide the feedback that allowed them to kind of drive their study, make a decision as to whether or not this was going to be what we were going to use in our study, and provide feedback as to what challenges would be for a heart failure patient. And it was actually very timely for me because I had just come back from suffering a sudden cardiac arrest within about a year's time of this. And so I was able to provide feedback directly as a cardiac arrest survivor. And for many heart failure patients, that sometimes is an outcome that we have to consider as well. So we were able to then actually move to data collection on this small study that we just completed, almost like a pretrial study, and looking at if there was any relationships and making sure that everything was working well with this before we would launch our larger study that is upcoming now, the actual clinical trial. And so, once again, I was able, as a patient partner, to be able to give a perspective to the research team. I felt that I was actually valued and I was giving some valuable information. And I think I was also given a lot of support from the team itself. And so the main focus that I have here is that I really received a lot of encouragement, and the encouragement went both ways. I was able to give encouragement to the team members, and they were able to also support me during this process as well. And as a patient partner, I come from a teaching background, and so I've had a lot of projects where I'm working with some of those clinical trainees and being able to give them feedback, and I really find that that is invaluable for me to be able to give them the feedback and give them the encouragement. We'd mentioned that a lot of these students are very, very eager and they're very smart individuals, but in my interactions with them, I've learned that they're just regular people, and they need a lot of encouragement, and they need people to kind of encourage them from a variety of perspectives as well. So I think this idea of making a difference as a patient partner, I feel like I'm making a difference in this project. I feel like I'm part of this team. It has been great that I've been right there from the start. And hopefully, as we move into knowledge translation and we actually have our clinical findings, hopefully I'll be able to help them make that knowledge translation and sharing that information so that that information does get out to our broader communities, not just in UHN, but in Canada as well. And I'd like to sum up by saying that what really drives me as a patient partner is being able to find something to give back and to represent. I always think of representing the people that can't speak. So we have to represent those other patients or other people that are heart failure patients who maybe can't make those contributions. But if we feel like we can be part of that team and we can actually give back to help those people, I think that gives me a lot of satisfaction. Help as long as I can help until it comes a time where maybe I can't help in the clinical setting, and there'll be somebody else. And this is great that we're trying to recruit other people who can be those people that can come forward and help make a stronger team.
Awesome. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for those examples. And I think as you were listening to Todd, I mean, this is a kind of a quote that I think kind of actually explains what both Rene and Heather, I guess that's 3 people, Rene, Heather, and Todd were talking about, which is this powerful expertise that patient partners bring, whether we're working on a program, we're working on a policy, we're working on designing services. It really kind of changes the way the conversation goes. And as I'm part of Unearth, I can tell you many different times where Todd's input kind of changed the course of how we were approaching something, because unless you have a patient perspective, you don't look at things the same way. And researchers will make a whole bunch of assumptions sometimes that can very much get corrected and rectified with a good patient partner involvement. The roles that you can play, I think, between some of the comments that you've heard from all 3. So sometimes, you can be a reviewer. So, there's a grant that's happening. Everybody's working on a proposal. So you can review and give your feedback on whether it's a good question, whether the approach and the methods make sense, or whether what they're proposing to do doesn't make any sense from a caregiver or a family or a patient perspective. You can be very much in the weeds as a contributor, and I think you kind of got a sense of that from the examples where you're contributing. You're looking at the survey that they're going to give to the patients or to the providers and making comments about it. You're looking at the tool like the Creos tool and giving feedback, or also thinking about what are the supports that someone's going to need to do those kinds of tools. And then you get the joy of being part of team meetings and oversight sometimes, which is where we go, okay, where are we? Are we on track? Are we achieving what we should? Or are we analyzing, interpreting the findings to see what they mean? And also what they mean from a researcher perspective may be very different and enhanced by what a patient partner would have to say. Then there's the telling the story, as Todd was talking about. And I know Rene was recently presenting at a conference on a study that she was on, being part of presentations, telling what the results are. And then also sometimes, and we have other patient partners here at UHN who are really trying to say, okay, the research says this, but how do we implement this in our heart function program, for example? And so there you're a patient partner who's really advising on implementation. And all of those roles are possible, but as you tackle it, you should be asking yourself some good questions, which Rene is going to talk through.
So there's some considerations that you should think about if you want to become involved as a person with lived experience in the research world. Some of the questions you should ask are what your own priorities are. What do you hope to gain from being engaged in the project? How will you communicate with researchers on the team? And how do you want to contribute to the research work? The one question that comes up is, do I know what engagement will look like? So you need to think about what roles you can play, what types of activities or tasks you can be engaged in. Do the activities align with your own personal priorities? What level of engagement are you comfortable with? And how many hours of work are you expected to contribute? Does the research team provide resources or support? That's very important to consider becoming involved in a project. So you can ask yourself questions like, who will provide me with the supports that I need? What funds are available to compensate me for my work? What supports are available? Like if I don't have a laptop, is that available to me to participate in these meetings? When and how will I be reimbursed for the work? And what supports are offered to help participate fully? As I mentioned, a laptop would be an example of that. When you think about compensation, it demonstrates the recognition of the value of the work that you're contributing to and the expertise that you bring to the table through your perspectives as a person with lived experience. By offering compensation, researchers seek to further create an open dialogue, reduce the power hierarchies caused by the fact that others around the table are receiving a salary to be there in their role, and it helps to ensure that people with lived experience not only have the resources they need, but that they are able to participate fully once again. Researchers strive to demonstrate respect for the community through protocols and practices. It is the responsibility of the team or teams recruiting people with lived experience to ensure that their budget includes room for compensation. We will now move to the question and answer part of the program. So I encourage you, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat.
I see lots of people have been commenting in the chat, but many of you sound like you have a lot of experience with being on review committees or being part of research teams. Are there some folks who've never done this before and you're wondering, like, how would I even get started? Like, is there any new folks who have some questions? Maybe can I ask Heather and Rene and Todd, like, how did you guys get started? Or, if you were thinking about doing this, how did you get found in the process?
Well, I was very fortunate that I was part of Cartwright when I first was diagnosed in 2021 when I had my cardiac conditions, and I got part of the Heart Life meeting group on Wednesdays, and I met Wayne Sandovic, and Wayne has been, has changed my life because Wayne put me in contact with Anne, and he could see that connection where I was someone who was very scientific and research oriented, and would be a valuable connection to that team. So, that was, for me, was life-changing for me to be able to be put in that situation. And then also to be put in a situation where I can be with a group of people that can look out for my well-being. So I think of that from, Anne's perspective, as she could be able to get a read and give me opportunities and start off with things that were small and see where I would fit in that group. And I think we're becoming leaders in this as a group here at UHN to be proud of this. And I think this will be a good model for other institutions to also then, piggyback off or to look at our model for recruiting people and making them feel welcome and making sure that they have a role and that they're, best used in the research community.
And I'm just thinking, Rene and Heather, like, have there been times when you've been offered to do something or asked to do something and you're like, I don't want to do that? Like, how have you handled that kind of like, does that fit with what I want? Does that fit with me? Thoughts on that question?
Yes, I've been in an environment where I felt very tokenized, and then being asked to contribute or come back for more meetings has felt very unsafe for me. So I've just decided not to participate.
And did you give that feedback, Rene, or did you just kind of like do what you needed to do for you, and the research team is a different beast?
I just did what I needed to do for me to feel safe.
That's fair. Yeah. And I think that's a point, I think, for everybody to be thinking about, like, it's the research team's responsibility, A, to support you, and B, we should always be thinking about the safety and the inclusiveness of the environments that we're creating on teams. I would hope that somebody followed up with you to try to make sure, but I don't know that scenario, but like, I think, and sometimes there's not a good fit, and that's okay too. Like, and I think to me, it's part of that communication that Todd was talking about, like, if you have kind of a person who's your point of contact, if you're feeling like, okay, this is not what I thought it was, or honestly, if this doesn't feel like a good fit, like they're not listening, they're not, and sometimes they don't. I feel like it's important for us as researchers, to get that feedback. Now, if you're not feeling safe, obviously that's a different thing altogether, but there should be a dialogue, and somebody should be checking, like, are you okay? Are you getting what you need? Are you on point? So that you feel that you can be a full patient partner in the story. Heather, did you want to have some thoughts about yay, nay, good fit, bad fit?
Yeah, I think we should always be keeping our own safety at paramount, right? And speak up. I had an experience where I worked with two different student researchers, and one student was very respectful of my time and engaged me very early in the process to get some information and work collaboratively. Another student contacted me the night before her presentation was due. And so I think it's fair enough to push back and say, this is not a good time for me, and you didn't leave yourself enough time to get the information, and you're just checking me off the list of tasks that you need to do. So I think it's important that we also can say no, as Rene articulated.
That's great. There's a couple questions here. I'll throw them, and maybe one of the three of you can jump in. So one of the questions is, are there networks where patient partners can connect with other patient partners to talk through issues they may have when they're on a research team? How have you guys kind of handled that?
I would say that it's being done informally because I'm involved in so many different projects. So you just throw that question out there and just try to gauge what other people are experiencing, and then maybe among that group, people can come up with suggestions on how to improve things, or how to speak up even when things aren't going so great.
And sometimes, do you guys have buddies? Like, there's a couple comments talking about kind of like peer support. And one of our participants, Ron, mentioned the Patient Advisor Network as a good resource. Like, how do you guys use other patient partners as a kind of counterpoint when you're kind of feeling like things are, or you're having stumbling blocks?
Well, I think that I've noticed that, as I've been participating, and that now there's been other people becoming involved in my project with Module 3, and they're other patient partners. So to have an additional one or two patient partners on a project, to have that provides a lot of support. You don't feel like you're alone. So I really have noticed that. And I also think that these seminars, and as we grow this program, I think that is definitely something that we'll be able to do, is perform, maybe make that meeting group, or where we meet once every couple of weeks and have a Zoom meeting where we can all, talk about issues that we maybe were having, just like we do at Heart Life, where we have our Wednesday meetings. We could have one, for this group as well.
And is that one of the questions you guys ask when you're asked to be part of a thing? Like, are there other patient partners?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's very important to feel that you're among a crowd that understands you or where you're coming from,
Yeah.
in considering being involved in a project.
I also think that it's important to have multiple patient partners on projects, because each of those partners brings a different perspective. And I know, I've been involved with one particular partner, and, he's sometimes felt like he doesn't understand the science behind something. And I said, yeah, but, you've made comments in our meetings that have enlightened me, because you see things from a totally different perspective. And every, patient or caregiver, their stories are all different. And their experiences are all different. And their journey through heart failure is different. And I remember one time I was talking with Heather Ross one time. This really sticks in my mind. I asked her why she does these treks and these journeys that she goes on. And she said she really learns a lot. And, one particular episode where she had learned what it was kind of like to feel like what somebody in heart failure was like. And it was really interesting to hear that, because I said, you know what, yeah, as a heart failure patient, even my family or my friends, they don't know what being in heart failure is like. And sometimes you get a little bit frustrated with that. But then to realize, well, if they've never experienced it, they can't feel it. And so to know that your researchers also are in that boat, and they just need a little bit of guidance. They need your help to know what it feels like for a patient.
Agreed with everything you guys are saying. There's a bunch of really nice comments in the chat too, with some other suggestions. So I'd mentioned the Patient Advisor Network. Todd mentioned HeartLife, which is a heart failure patient organization, national. And then also Sheila mentioned, like we do within Transform, we have like meetings twice a year, and we always have patient partners who are with us for that day, and kind of as a way to kind of connect with each other and connect with other research, I think is great. And then there's another comment that I think is very interesting from Jennifer, saying, it's ideal if the institution, whether it's UHN or Ted Rogers Center, has a patient partner lead, and that does exist. Oddly enough, it would be me for Transform. And certainly within UHN, we have a program called Pride in Patient Engagement and Research, Piper, because everything has to be an acronym. If you haven't figured that out about research, that's your first 101. And they do have people also who support. The thing that I would say, and I'd be curious to hear what Todd and Rene and Heather think about this, there's this disconnect at times. So if I just think about me, so I'm the individual and I will connect folks to research teams, but I'm not on every single research team. And so sometimes you can have a patient engagement lead, but then I throw you to the wolves when you are with the research team. So I just wonder if you guys could reflect on that and kind of how you navigate that space, or what you need or what you use to navigate that space, because I'm not always there.
Well, I think the masterclass that we participated with Transform in Montreal last year was amazing. Like we had 2.5 days of sessions with our peers and with your team, and that gave me a lot of confidence. So I think we need to have people understand that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're asking you to consider coming on board, and at the end of this talk, you'll see what the dates are for the next following seminars. And if you want to do this, you can sign up, and you can take this basically this knowledge transfer that this group has, and learning to become a really good patient partner, and you'll have a peer group and you'll have people to go to. And so this is really essentially the first class, I think, and you would agree, that we're developing here, and that we're going to hopefully have graduates year after year after year, so that peers can mentor each other. We know who to go to, probably on the more professional scientist side if we need more additional help. And we can, this group, we can continue to develop the curriculum for further patient partners going down the line. But sign up for sure, and then you'll get this knowledge delivered.
And I think that is, so today was really, and although a bunch of you are what I would call patient champions, you're not even partners, you're like champions, you could be delivering this course. That's exactly what we're intending, is we're really trying to continue to not only bring new folks in, but strengthen our network of patient partners. And so what we've done is we're also looking to line you up with actual researchers that have proposals going in this winter. So what we've done, do you mind putting up the slide, and so our little group, we thought, okay, what could we do today as a kind of like introductory session? And then for some of you, who have already done lots of training, this wouldn't be relevant. But for new people, like I saw Anne-Marie and Ryan were putting some comments in, who are, I think, 2 new folks. What we've done is we've created a little program called Foundations. Can you go to the next slide for me? Yeah. So the way that research works is basically they love to give us deadlines. And so research teams are always working on proposals. And there are 2 kind of seasons in Canada, primarily when health research teams are working on proposals. One is a spring deadline, which this year is March. And the other is a August, September deadline. So I guess summer. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to keep building our network and to really train folks who are new to this up over January and February, while we also embed you in research teams that are writing proposals. So one of the things that I think you would have heard as an undercurrent, particularly in some of the comments from Rene and Todd, is you want to be there early. So, you're not showing up like 2 days before they're submitting a proposal and you have no idea what they're doing and you're like a rubber stamp. So we're going to do 2 virtual sessions, one on January 29th and one on February 12th. And then we're going to do an in-person session on February 25th, where we're going to bring our patient partners in together with some of the researchers that are working on proposals. Now, they may be working for proposals for either spring or summer, but then we'll kind of get you so that you kind of have a sense of the lay of the land, a little bit more in depth about like what are some of the tasks that you have to do and some of the activities, and orient you. And then we would hope then be embedded in some specific research teams, whether they're working towards a spring submission or a summer submission. And then it will kind of give you a sense to start going with a little bit of training. And then we're going to work on kind of keeping the network of peer partners, patient partners connected, so that probably, that kind of problem solving and messiness that you might run into, we can kind of keep you well supported throughout the process. So we're really mostly focused on folks in the GTA because these are all Transform or UHN researchers. I guess we could bring in some folks who are outside, but it would kind of depend because we're really hoping to do an in-person session. But that's really what we want to do. And then our idea, as Heather was kind of speaking, is to make this kind of an annual process so that there's this constant both change in the culture for our researchers so that they know that there's these patient partners, they are a little bit more involved and knowledgeable and about how to be a good research team that engages patient partners appropriately. And then go from there. And then before I go to my last slide, maybe Rene, Heather, Todd, any last words of advice or encouragement to people considering being a patient partner?
Go for it.
I would just say that
run into trouble. Rene will help you.
I think all my experiences have been very positive. And as I say, sometimes when you run into difficulties, I really get the read that it's the research teams that also need to grow in this area. And I think they want to grow. And I think this program will allow us to not only help us recruit patient partners and provide them with support, but also get them connected with these other researchers as well, who are probably seeking patient partners and they don't know where to find them and they don't know how to use them. And I think as that whole system grows, I think everybody's going to have a positive experience.
Heather, last words?
Yeah, I'd say that you as people with lived experience have a tremendous amount of knowledge that's really important to impart and be at the table. And so this could be a huge contribution to advancing the treatment and cures for a lot of what we suffer from. So do it.
We're like a Nike commercial. So I was going to say, if you have any questions, we'll send around the link to everybody. If there's anything that kind of feels like weird, just email me or Sam. We're happy to answer any questions. And then the other thing I should tell you is we've already shared with our network of researchers that we're also doing this and given them a heads up that, you know, we're going to be reaching out to them to know who's submitting, who's got what, and then trying to do a little bit of matchmaking. So just rest assured, we're not just talking to patient partners. We also want our researchers to be ready to be good collaborators with patient partners. So we will post the slides and the recording from today. If you are interested in knowing like what kind of studies are going on within UHN and Transform, you can take a look at the link there, which is Studies in Recruitment. It's always good to know kind of what is going on in this universe. And then please stay up to date by registering for our newsletter. And as I close out, just want to say a huge thanks to Todd, Rene, and Heather for designing today's session and all of its content, as well as delivering and sharing your perspectives, as well as thanks to Samantha and Augusta, who are our behind the scenes wizards on today and every day. So thanks, everybody. Hope to see you in the new year. And all the best for the holidays.